Were we supposed to, like, have drinks?
Oh yeah. Welcome to Adaptable,
The show where we discuss whether the book or the movie is better.
I'm Jacob,
And I'm Josh.
and today we're discussing
Eragon. Now, before we take off into the debate, we do need to discuss the plot.
This episode will not be spoiler-free.
Our story starts in the magical land of Allegasia, where a boy named Eragon is surprised while hunting in the mountains by the appearance of a mysterious blue stone. Doing his best to keep it a secret from his superstitious neighbors in the town of Carvajal, his task becomes much harder when it turns out that the stone is in fact a dragon egg.
Servants of the Empire come to Carvajal searching for the egg, and in the process burn down Eragon's family farm and kill his uncle. This forces Eragon to flee with the town storyteller Brom and the newly hatched dragon Saphira.
It turns out that Eragon is the last remaining dragon rider outside of the evil king Galbatorix, who forsook the rider's original mission of maintaining peace throughout the land. What follows is Eragon's tutorship in the ways of the sword, magic, and dragon riding as he and Brom travel the length of the Empire to reach the Varden, Galbatorix's greatest opponents.
Along their journey, they meet a wide variety of characters, ranging from Angela the fortune teller to the elven warrior Arya, all the way to the disgraced son of Galbatorix's right hand Murtagh. All the while, they are pursued by Durza, a sorcerer possessed by evil spirits.
The climax of the story takes place in the Varden's home of Farthen Dûr, a hollowed-out mountain, where Eragon finally defeats Durza and takes one step closer to defeating Galbatorix. Now, should I go first, seeing as I'm the eldest?
Eldest is the second book. I'll go first.
Fine.
The book Eragon is light years ahead of the movie, and here is why. Firstly, the book has so much more detail in it than the movie could ever have. Biggest one here is the passing of time. The book takes place starting in winter and transitions all the way into fall. The movie doesn't do that. The movie starts in what appears to be spring and ends roughly the same time of year. Allegasia is a massive continent, and the movie makes it seem like Brom and Eragon are able to cross all that way in just a matter of days. Whereas the book makes it very clear it takes an extremely long time, especially on horseback, to cross this massive country. Which leads me to number 2. The passing of time also allows Eragon to develop more into his birthright of becoming an actual dragon rider. His learning along the way as Brom is teaching him the ancient language. His initial struggles to barely lift a pebble all the way to the final battle where he can wield fire. The movie burns through 5 book pages in 1 minute. There's no way you could develop that number of skills in such a short period of time. The passing of time also allows us to more feel for the connection that Brom and Eragon develop along their journey, and has Brom becoming Eragon's father figure. Number 3, character development. The book introduces Katrina, Roran, Eragon's cousin, and does a much better job of explaining Brom. Now, Roran and Katrina, I will admit, they do not play a huge role in the story of Eragon. However, clearly the movie makers intended there to be a sequel, Eldest, and in that story, they play a huge role. So not having Katrina in the movie and not giving Roran much screen time or any kind of character development whatsoever would make that seem like a little bit of a hard jump. Secondly, you also have Brom. The book kind of teases out more information of what makes him so mysterious, why is he so wise, how come he knows so much about magic and the ancient language and dragon riders. And it's revealed throughout the story as the reader somewhat starts to figure it out. He himself was actually a dragon rider, one of the last. The movie just tosses that to the wind.
You know, it's funny you mention wind. I think you've talked enough.
Fine.
The movie Eragon is better than the book. And here's why. Point number 1, the cast. Making movies is a visual art, and it is important to have the right actors on screen. And with the exception of one actor, they did a really good job casting this movie. You've got Jeremy Irons holding down the fort as Brom. You've got John Malkovich as Galbatorix. Rachel Weisz provides the voice of Saphira. There are also some great supporting performances from Murtagh, played by Garrett Hedlund, and John Carlyle, who's delightfully evil as Durza. And speaking of Durza, that brings me to point 2. The movie simplifies the conflict. It's difficult when you're the protagonist of a fantasy novel to kind of understand your place in the world. You've got a vague, evil, far-off villain, and a lot of training to do. What the movie does successfully is establish just how cruel Durza is by showing more of him than we get to see in the book. This tends to simplify the conflict and make it much easier for an audience to digest, how we have Eragon on one side, and Durza, the primary antagonist, on the other. And finally, point number 3, the CGI in this movie holds up extremely well for a movie that's 13 years old. Saphira is excellently animated, although she doesn't achieve the blinding brilliance she does in the novel. It is kind of hard to portray on screen. As well as the magic effects, Durza's in particular have this lovely, curved, twisted villainry that adds a lot to the character.
Your whole take on this whole thing is curved and twisted. You mentioned the cast is great besides one actor. Who is that actor?
That character is Ed Speleers, who plays Eragon in the movie. And he's not my favorite by a long shot, but he does have this way of adding this greater calling sort of sense to the character.
But he's got this whole poor me attitude, which Eragon just doesn't have in the book.
I take your point on his attitude. However, we get a lot more out of the supporting characters than, we would in the novel. Particularly Durza, who's, we actually get some screen time with the guy before the final battle of Farthendur, or that first moment where he's hunting down Arya.
True, I just can't get over Eragon.
I will concede your point that Ed Speleers' performance is not for everyone.
Correct.
However, I did notice that you said the movie burns through 5 pages of book every minute.
Because it does.
True. However, is that such a bad thing? The trend for fantasy novels was set by Tolkien, who's kind of the master world builder, and Christopher Paolini is clearly following in that vein of thought. However, there are parts of the book, particularly the trek that takes a month to Gilead to rescue Arya, or the trek across the desert, that don't add enough character growth to make any sense. And of course, those details aren't included in the movie.
I will give you the trek across the desert is kind of unnecessary. Sure, you could have cut that out, but as far as Gilead goes, do need to end up rescuing Arya, as obviously she is one of the main characters.
I understand that, but he didn't necessarily have to make it take a month. It's showing the scope of the Empire, sure, but the towns sort of fade into one another as we go on by, and you get from Carvahall to Gilead to Farthendur pretty quickly without missing too much.
Okay, yes, I'll give you that. However, can we just talk about sequels for a minute?
Sure.
The book does an incredible job of setting up all the characters and necessary plot points that will be used later on in the coming books. The movie doesn't even attempt to do this.
Now, hold on.
It drops Katrina, barely touches on Roran, Murtagh, Angela, just to name a few.
Okay, that's fine, but you have to remember the timeline of when these works were created. The movie came out in 2006, which meant that they had to start filming, up to a year and a half in advance. And Eldest, the second book, only came out in 2005, which meant that there had to be something that didn't quite get communicated as far as which characters were going to be important in which books. I understand it's a frustration, but it's not necessarily a knock on the movie.
However, Paolini would have known ahead of time. He has this idea, this overarching story that he wants to accomplish. The filmmakers could have asked, hey, we want to follow along this whole story arc. Obviously, if there's going to be sequels, are there any characters or certain points of the plot that we need to make sure are in our version so that sequels make sense? And they just didn't do that. They failed to make it a good standalone film, let alone the beginning of a series.
All right, you're not wrong. I admit it. The book is better. I'm so sorry, Christopher Paolini, please don't hate me. I love the books so much.
Same, they're amazing. This has been
Adaptable. Oh no, I had it.
Damn it! I was like, you gotta have more here. You gotta give me more to come back with. Today we're discussing Eragon.
And today we are discussing the tome known as Adaptable.
Jinxed yourself.
Yeah.
I did. My expectations were too high.